The central nervous system consists of two main sections, the brain and the spinal cord. The brain is responsible for coordinating the actions of the body as well as processing incoming information. While many systems run autonomously, the brain is the originator of signals that send chemical and electrical impulses to these areas, allowing for that functioning. The brain, however, needs a way to access the rest of the body, so it is connected to the spinal cord, a tubular structure of nervous tissue. From this spinal cord, additional nerves extend to extremities as part of the peripheral nervous system. Ancient thinkers believed that the mind resided in the heart. However, once scientists realized the brain was actually the location of cognitive function, attention went immediately there. Although much of the brain is still a black box, some things are clear about how the central nervous system works. First, the CNS is made of specialized cells called neurons, which conduct electricity. The neuron comprises three main parts: the cell body, dendrites attached to the cell body, and the axon, which extends away and is covered in a layer of fat called the myelin sheath. Dendrites receive chemical signals from other neurons, which the cell body converts to electricity and then sends that electrical signal, or neural impulse, down the axon to be messaged to other neurons. Neurons don't touch, however, and electrical signals that reach the end of the axon trigger a release of chemical messengers called neurotransmitters, which travel across the tiny gap between neurons called the synapse. Once these neurotransmitters connect with the dendrites of the second neuron, the chain of events begins again. Different types of neurons release different combinations of neurotransmitters and are part of a vast network of other neurons that are designed for specific functions. For instance, certain pathways in the brain are designed to release dopamine when you look at your cell phone and see a social media notification. What's dopamine, you ask? Well, dopamine is a neurotransmitter that gives the individual a feeling of pleasure. Other neurotransmitters include adrenaline, also known as epinephrine, which is used in fight or flight responses. Serotonin modifies one's mood, GABA relaxes the body and helps learning, and endorphins create feelings of bliss while reducing physical and psychological pain. Of course, these are only a subset of all of the available neurotransmitters. These are just the most common. Okay, cool. But how do we know all of this? Well, there are a number of modern technologies at our disposal for understanding how the brain works. Researchers can put people through specific exercises or experiences while scanning brain activity to see where electrical signals and blood flow occur. This following video does a great job of covering the primary tools at the disposal of neuroscientists.
As far as we know, there's only one thing in our solar system sophisticated enough to study itself: the human brain. But this self-investigation is incredibly challenging. A living brain is shielded by a thick skull, swaddled in layers of protective tissue, and made up of billions of tiny connected cells. That's why it's so difficult to isolate, observe, and understand diseases like Alzheimer's. So how do we study living brains without harming their owners? We can use a trio of techniques called EEG, fMRI, and PET. Each measures something different and has its own strengths and weaknesses, and we'll look at each in turn. First is EEG, or electroencephalography, which measures electrical activity in your brain. As brain cells communicate, they produce waves of electricity. Electrodes placed on the skull pick up these waves, and differences in the signals detected between electrodes provide information about what's happening. This technique was invented almost 100 years ago, and it's still used to diagnose conditions like epilepsy and sleep disorders. It's also used to investigate what areas of the brain are active during learning or paying attention. EEG is non-invasive, relatively inexpensive, and fast. It can measure changes that occur in just milliseconds. Unfortunately, it's hard to determine exactly where any particular pattern originates. Electrical signals are generated constantly all over the brain, and they interact with each other to produce complex patterns. Using more electrodes or sophisticated data processing algorithms can help. But in the end, while EEG can tell you precisely when certain activity occurs, it can't tell you precisely where. To do that, you'd need another technique, such as functional magnetic resonance imaging, or fMRI. fMRI measures how quickly oxygen is consumed by brain cells. active areas of the brain use oxygen more quickly. So watching an fMRI scan while a person completes cognitive or behavioral tasks can provide information about which regions of the brain might be involved. That allows us to study everything from how we see faces to how we understand what we're feeling. fMRI can pinpoint differences in brain activity to within a few millimeters, but it's thousands of times slower than EEG. Using the two techniques together can help show when and where neural activity is occurring. The third, even more precise technique is called positron emission tomography, and it measures radioactive elements introduced into the brain. That sounds much scarier than it actually is. PET scans, like fMRI and EEG, are completely safe. During a PET scan, a small amount of radioactive material called a tracer is injected into the bloodstream, and doctors monitor its circulation through the brain. By modifying the tracer to bind to specific molecules, researchers can use PET to study the complex chemistry in our brains. It's useful for studying how drugs affect the brain and detecting diseases like Alzheimer's. But this technique has the lowest time resolution of all because it takes minutes for the tracer to circulate and changes to show up. These techniques collectively help doctors and scientists connect what happens in the brain with our behavior. But they're also limited by how much we still don't know. For example, let's say researchers are interested in studying how memory works. After asking 50 participants to memorize a series of images while in MRI scanners, the researchers might analyze the results and discover a number of active brain regions. Making a link between memory and specific parts of the brain is an important step forward. But future research would be necessary to better understand what's happening in each region, how they work together, and whether the activity is because of their involvement in memory or another process occurring simultaneously. More advanced imaging and analysis technology might one day provide more accurate results and even distinguish the activity of individual neurons. Until then, our brains will keep measuring, analyzing, and innovating in pursuit of that quest to understand one of the most remarkable things we've ever encountered.
Clearly, there are a lot of tools at our disposal for studying the central nervous system. But what about the rest of the body? The brain and spinal cord make up the CNS, but information sent by the brain has to get where it needs to go. Introduce the peripheral nervous system. This system includes all the sensory and motor neurons required for bodily function. The PNS can be further divided into two parts, the somatic nervous system and the autonomic nervous system. The somatic nervous system is connected to the musculoskeletal system and allows for voluntary control of bodily movements. For this reason, it is also known as the voluntary nervous system. The autonomic nervous system, however, extends to the non-voluntary or automatic processes in the body, such as breathing, digestion, and temperature regulation. The ANS can be further divided into two subsystems, the parasympathetic and sympathetic nervous system. The parasympathetic nervous system is designed for rest, relaxation, and maintenance of standard bodily growth and functioning. This includes digesting food, relaxing the heart and blood vessels, promoting sexual arousal, and contracting the bladder for waste expulsion. This last point is why you always have to pee when playing hide and seek. Your body calms down and goes into relaxation once you find the perfect place to hide away. When the parasympathetic nervous system is functioning, it's like you're sitting next to a candlelight with a nice breeze, feeling calm and content. Maybe now you're experiencing the sympathetic nervous system. This system is essential for the fight or flight response, which enables you to escape the giant bear that's chasing you. Your pupils dilate to see better in the dark, your heart rate increases to send more blood and oxygen through your body, your digestive system shuts down because you don't need nutrients if you're dead, and your body releases the hormone adrenaline and noradrenaline to give you an even bigger burst of energy and focus. These hormones are a class of chemicals called catecholamines, and they are released as both hormones and neurotransmitters. We'll get to the difference between these two when discussing the endocrine system, but for now, just relax and let your parasympathetic nervous system take over again. Disorders of the nervous system come in various forms, primarily dealing with either too much or too little electrical signals sent to various parts of the body. There are a number we want to review in this course, but we will put a pin in that until class.